Ready for a deep dive today?
Always.
We're heading to China's Guangdong province, to two regions that are, well, kind of hard to say.
But so worth the effort. Trust me.
Siyi and Wuyi. Ever heard of them?
Maybe not by name, but they've influenced a lot of global Chinese culture, more than people realize.
That's what we're here to unpack. Towers that blend Chinese and Western architecture,
Yeah.
ancient wisdom that's still a thing, and even how 4 counties became 5.
It's not just geography, though.
Right. It's the people, their dialects even.
Rivalries.
Friendly ones.
Yeah.
But definitely some back and forth about who does what best. We'll get into all that.
Okay, gotta start basic, right? What do these names even mean?
Siyi is straightforward. 4 counties. Originally, that was Xinhui, Taishan, Kaiping, and Enping.
Ah, okay, makes sense.
But then in 1983, Heishan joined the party.
So 5 counties.
Exactly. That's how we got Wuyi. 5 counties.
But I bet it gets confusing.
For sure. Especially overseas Chinese communities. Lots of them were established before 1983, so they still identify strong with Siyi. It's like the name sticks, even if the map changes.
Exactly. That's why this deep dive is more than just places, right? Understanding these regions is understanding a huge chunk of global Chinese history.
Our sources mention Siyi and Wuyi were major for Chinese immigration.
Hugely influential. But before we go global, let's zoom in on the local stuff. Even within Siyi and Wuyi, particularly with Heishan, there's a ton of variety.
Like starting with geography.
Oh yeah, Siyi, for example. Think plains, good for farming, but also hills, rocky coastline, a bunch of bays. Nature was mixing it up.
And that probably made life tougher for people back in the day.
For sure. That's partly why Siyi's culture stayed so traditional. Farming that's harder, well, you stick to the old ways longer. You keep your dialects, your unique architecture.
Like those Dailu towers in Kaiping.
Exactly. Those were built with a mix of Chinese and Western styles.
Super unique looking.
And they weren't placed randomly either. Feng Shui principles, harmonizing with the environment, that's that ancient knowledge we mentioned, still relevant today.
Whoa. So it's not just about pretty buildings, but like deeper meaning.
Totally. Now compare that with Heishan. Geography was way more chill there, mostly flat, which means easier to develop. Sources mention that specifically.
And being closer to cities probably helped too.
Absolutely. Heishan modernized fast, rode that economic boom in Guangdong, integrated into the modern Chinese economy, while Siyi, well, they held on to the more rural stuff longer.
So it's like 2 paths, but same starting point.
That's a great way to put it. 2 paths. Now imagine how that plays out in culture.
This is where I get lost.
It's like 2 siblings, right? Both amazing, but different. Siyi, because things developed slower, they kept those tight bonds to traditional Chinese culture. Unique dialects like Taishanese were everywhere, and the customs, man, rooted in rural life, they really stuck around.
Okay, so that's Siyi. What about Heishan, the other sibling?
Heishan, being closer to the city lights, well, they were drawn to that modern feel. Their culture became more contemporary, less tied to the older ways.
Different vibes, but same family.
Exactly. And even with differences, there are those shared family traits. Both Siyi and Wuyi, huge on family. Close ties, ancestor worship, that's core stuff. And festivals. Man, they celebrate with this crazy energy. Lion dances, temple fairs, the food.
Oh yeah, food. I bet they're both into that Cantonese cuisine, though maybe they argue over whose is best.
Oh, for sure. Each county, even though those Cantonese roots are shared, they'll have their own special dishes, local ingredients, and all that.
I could get behind a food rivalry. Now, what about language? The sources mention Siyi dialects are different.
They're part of the Cantonese family, but with twists. Like Taishanese, you could almost think it's a whole other language.
And that must cause some trouble.
Huge threat, actually. Standard Cantonese, Mandarin, those are taking over, especially with younger folks. You've got grandparents who mostly speak Taishanese, grandkids only catching a few words.
Sad, like losing a piece of history.
It is. But Todi, there are these awesome efforts to save these dialects. There's a national project. They're documenting endangered ones like Taishanese. Plus, Guangdong itself is promoting Cantonese in all its variations.
So there's hope.
There is. Don't underestimate overseas Chinese communities either. They're keeping these languages alive big time. It's amazing how language ties people across continents.
Powerful stuff. Okay, gotta ask about something major that shaped these regions. Emigration. Especially for Siyi, right?
Immigration is like woven into Siyi. 19th, 20th centuries, huge waves of people leaving. The impact is undeniable, even today.
Yeah, our sources mentioned money sent back home.
Remittances. Exactly. Fueled the economy, funded infrastructure, even those Dialu towers we talked about.
Money earned miles away, shaping the look of these places.
Mind-blowing. It's not just buildings, though. Emigration changed how society was structured, how families worked, even Xi's view of the world. This mix of local and global, you can still see it.
And how does that compare to Haitian, which was more about, factories and stuff?
Industrialization, yeah. Haitian went modern fast. Being close to cities did that. So their culture, it reflects that. More urban, less about overseas connections. Those clan structures that Siyi's got, they kind of weakened as younger folks in Haitian went for city life.
So we've got these two regions, different paths. I'm sensing some tension.
Oh, for sure. There's rivalry, but the good kind. They compete for investment from overseas Chinese. They show off their cultures during festivals, even brag about their tourist spot.
Like siblings, but on a regional scale?
Exactly. Same but different is spot on. So give me some specifics. How does this play out in real life? Say there's two villages, right? One Siyi, the other's Wuyi. Both want tourists. The Siyi one might say, hey, check out our old dialects towers, our traditional Taishanese opera, playing up that history.
And the Wuyi village.
They're all about, we've got modern stuff, sleek buildings, come party, attracting a different crowd.
Each using their strengths. It's kind of cool, actually.
It is, and it's not just tourism. It's in sports events, getting new businesses, add some spice, keeps them both on their toes.
I like it. Okay, so we've got the big picture of Siyi and Wuyi. Now, there's this city that I'm really curious about, Jiangmen. It's part of Wuyi, right?
Right. Yangmen is fascinating. Our sources describe it as this blend of traditional and modern, which is so Jiangmen.
It caught my eye. So where does it fit in, geographically?
Major city within Wuyi, for sure.
Yeah.
Strategically located, too, on the west bank of the Pearl River Delta. That means it connects the greater Bay Area to western Guangdong and southwestern China.
So not just a cultural hub, but important for, trade and stuff.
Totally. Economically, Jiangmen's doing well. Balanced industries, strong ties to Hong Kong for investment. It's a city on the move, aiming for high tech and all that.
And it's nicknamed the capital of overseas Chinese. That says something, right?
It does. Jiangmen has a huge GE diaspora. Millions of people from there are all over the world. Their impact on the city is massive, culturally and money-wise. It's a place where you can really trace the paths of those who left and those who came back, bringing all sorts of new ideas with them.
It sounds like a place where the past and present are constantly bumping into each other.
Huh.
Before we get into daily life there, though, any hints from Jiangmen's history about how it got this blend?
Jiangmen's history is full of twists, just like the city itself. It started as a tiny market town and then, boom, forced to open up as a treaty port in 1904.
Treaty port, meaning?
Basically forced to trade with the West, whether they liked it or not. And that brought Western stuff into their architecture, adding another layer to this unique cultural mix they've got going.
So even back then, there was this blending of East and West.
Exactly. Jiangmen is a city that embraces both its Chinese roots and its exposure to the world. Creates this dynamic mix that's always changing.
I can't wait to dive deeper. So what's everyday life like in Jiangmen? How do people handle this mix of old and new?
Okay, picture this. You start your day with Tai Chi in a park, something super traditional, but you're surrounded by folks jogging, cycling, modern fitness, right?
Okay, I can see it.
Then, as the sun sets, you're watching these musical fountain shows, blending Chinese and Western classical music. Afterwards, a stroll along the promenade, maybe a game of Chinese checkers by the river.
It sounds peaceful.
It is. Jiangmen blends the old and new effortlessly. And you see it in the buildings too, right?
Yeah, I bet there's more than just those traditional houses.
Jiangmen's a feast for the eyes. You've got the beautifully kept old courtyard houses, but then bam, these sleek skyscrapers right next to them. Then there's Chikan ancient town, historic Kilu buildings, narrow alleys, bustling markets. It's like stepping back in time.
So that's the old school side. What about modern Jiangmen?
Well, it's constantly changing, but it never forgets where it came from. There are modern architectural marvels, like the Wuyi Museum of Overseas Chinese. Stunning building, dedicated to the diaspora. Tells their stories in a very contemporary way.
It's amazing how Jiangmen honors its past while looking to the future. Okay, that's a lot to take in. Let's pause here and let our listeners process all this amazing info. Welcome back. We've been exploring Jiangmen, this city that blends tradition and modernity, but let's not forget the other counties in Siyi and Wuyi. They all add to this amazing cultural mix.
Like pieces of a puzzle, right?
Yeah.
Each one's unique, and together they create this incredible picture.
Love that. Okay, let's start with Taishan, the heart of Siyi, as some call it. What makes it stand out?
Taishan is all about the connection between sea and overseas Chinese. It was the spot for folks leaving, especially in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Even today, tons of Taishanese people worldwide trace their roots back there.
So you can really feel that immigrant history there, like the stories of those who left to find new lives.
Absolutely. And with that history comes this strong desire to preserve their culture, especially the Taishanese dialect. They're fighting to keep it alive so future generations can hear their ancestors' voices.
It's more than just words, right? It's about identity, keeping those connections strong. Okay, next up is Kaiping, home to those awesome Diaolu towers.
Ah, Taiping. Visually stunning. A place where East meets West in architecture, all thanks to those overseas Chinese connections.
Like they brought back pieces of the world and built them into their homes.
Exactly. The Diaolu Towers are the best example. Imagine these tall structures, paid for with money from immigrants, mixing European castles, Greek columns, and traditional Chinese watchtowers all in one.
They're not just pretty, though, are they? I read they had a purpose.
Oh yeah, remember those tough geographical features? Bandits and floods were a big problem back then. The Diaolu Towers were for defense, safe havens for entire villages.
So they were about protection, born out of necessity, but shaped by both local and global ideas.
It's amazing how form and function came together like that. Today, they're like these proud symbols of the past, drawing visitors from all over. Kaiping has really capitalized on them, turning them into a symbol of the region and a big draw for tourism.
Smart move. Okay, we've got Taishan and Kaiping, both tied to emigration. What about Xinhuan? Where does it fit in?
Xinhui gives us a slightly different angle on the sea experience. Immigration played a part, sure, but it was also shaped by being close to the Pearl River Delta, that economic powerhouse. Plus, it was a big center for agriculture and trade. Rural life meets bustling commerce, you could say.
So, a bit more of a mixed bag of influences there. What kind of cultural stuff does Xinhui have? Anything special?
Well, they're known for their fertile land, producing all sorts of goodies, rice, fruits, especially their famous mandarin oranges. But it's not just about farming. Xinhui also has historical sites, cultural traditions, even their own unique dialect. Close to Taishanese, but still distinct.
So, strong roots in tradition, but open to new stuff, too.
Yeah, that's Xinhui. Now, last but not least, there's Enping.
Tell us in.
Enping is nature's playground in Siyi. Mountains, forests, hot springs, serene landscapes. You go there to unwind, reconnect with nature.
Sounds like a total escape.
Uh-huh.
Any cultural or historical stuff hidden in all that nature?
Oh yeah, they blend it seamlessly. Ancient temples in the forests, historic villages, and another unique dialect, adding to that linguistic diversity of Siyi. Like the other counties, they're working hard to preserve it, making sure those ancestral voices don't fade away.
It's amazing how each county has its own thing going on, a different flavor of Siyi and Wuyi. But it can't all be sunshine and roses, right?
Yeah.
What are some challenges these regions face?
Well, like a lot of the world, Siyi and Wuyi are dealing with urbanization and globalization. Cities in Guangdong are growing so fast, putting pressure on rural areas like Siyi. You see old villages disappearing as cities expand, people getting displaced, and cultural stuff fading away.
It's that classic progress versus preservation battle. Happens everywhere. What can they do about it?
There are a few ways they're trying to balance things out. Some areas are protected zones where development is limited. They also encourage building new stuff that still uses traditional designs.
Trying to bridge that gap between old and new.
Right. And education is key. Teaching young people about their heritage, why it's important. Lots of workshops, festivals, and events are popping up so they feel that pride and want to preserve their culture.
Giving them the tools to become caretakers of their own culture. What other challenges are there?
Those dialects fading away is a big one. As younger folks get better at Mandarin and Standard Cantonese, the unique ones might disappear. It's like losing centuries of knowledge and history.
A core part of their identity, just vanishing.
It's tough, but there's good news. They're working hard to save them. National projects, local initiatives, even schools are getting involved.
So there's hope. What about keeping up with China's booming economy? Any worries there?
Definitely. Rural Siyi counties aren't developing as fast as more urbanized areas like Heishan. As China shifts to high-tech and services, some regions might get left behind.
So it's not just culture and language, it's making sure everyone has a chance to succeed.
Exactly. Investing in education and infrastructure is key. Bringing jobs to rural areas will stop people from moving away.
It's a tough problem. Needs everyone working together. But, I'm struck by how resilient Siyi and Wuyi are. They've been through a lot and always find a way.
That's what's so impressive. Despite the challenges, they're optimistic. They're proud of their heritage and want to keep it alive. They know their identity comes from their history, culture, and connection to the land.
That refusal to give up gives me hope. Okay, back to Jiangmen for a bit. We talked about how it's a blend of tradition and modernity. Can you give us some real-life examples of what that looks like?
Imagine walking down a street in Jiangmen. You might pass a busy market full of fresh food and local snacks, vendors shouting just like their ancestors did.
I can picture it.
But then turn a corner and bam, skyscrapers. Modern design, companies, and startups.
It's like stepping between two different worlds that somehow work together.
Exactly. It's how Jiangmen balances old and new. And it's in how people live, too. You might see an old guy practicing calligraphy, a super old tradition, while teenagers nearby are filming a TikTok dance.
Ancient and modern, side by side.
Yep. And the food scene's the same. Want traditional Cantonese? You got it. Family-run places with recipes passed down for generations. But then there's trendy cafes doing fusion food, mixing Asian and Western flavors.
It's like a food adventure.
Totally. Jiangmen's open to new ideas, but respects its food heritage. Now, something we haven't talked much about, how does art and culture shape Siyi and Wuyi's identity? It seems like more than just entertainment.
I'm curious about that too.
Art and culture are essential to understanding these regions. It's what connects their history, values, and hopes. Music is huge E. Cantonese opera, with the costumes, drama, storytelling, is still super popular.
So the old ways are still strong.
They are, but there's also a new wave of musicians blending traditional sounds with modern stuff. A really cool mix.
It keeps things fresh and relevant for younger folks.
For sure. And it's not just music. You see traditional crafts like calligraphy where artisans use techniques from centuries ago. But then there's modern art too. Installations, murals, street art, adding this young energy to the mix.
Like a conversation between the past and present.
Exactly. And that conversation keeps evolving. New generations bring their own ideas, making things even richer. Now, what about the Greater Bay Area initiative? We talked about it a bit, but how's it really affecting Siyi and Wuyi?
Yeah, it feels like a big deal, but I'm not sure I get all the details.
It's a huge plan, connecting 9 cities in Guangdong, including Jiangmen, with Hong Kong and Macau. And yeah, it's changing things everywhere in good and challenging ways.
So it's reshaping the whole region. How so?
You see it in the infrastructure, highways, bridges, high-speed rail, all brand new, connecting places in ways never seen before.
So it's easier to get around.
Way easier. Good for people, businesses, for ideas to spread faster. And it's not just about the economy, it's cultural too. More exchange between cities, artists working together, institutions collaborating.
So the Greater Bay Area is like waking everyone up to what other cities are doing.
Yeah. There's this buzz, this feeling that it's not just about living and working, but creating new things and sharing them with the world. Okay, before we wrap up this part, let's talk about Siyi and Wuyi's nature. All this culture is great, but they've got amazing scenery too. You're so right. Can't forget about the beautiful landscapes. Rolling hills, forests, rivers winding through valleys, the sky reflected in the water. Siyi and Wuyi have it all, from coasts to mountains.
It sounds like a nature lover's dream.
It is. And these landscapes shaped how people lived and worked for centuries. Their livelihoods, their traditions, all tied to the land.
Can you give me some examples? How did nature influence their lives?
The rivers are a perfect example. They were how people got around, traded goods, and fished. The fertile land beside them fed everyone, but they're more than just practical. They inspired traditions like the dragon boat races.
Ah, those races. More than just a competition.
Exactly. It's about celebrating their connection to the water. And that respect for nature goes beyond rivers. They treat the land with care, using sustainable farming practices passed down through generations. They get that if nature's healthy, they're healthy.
A good lesson for all of us. Now, what about tourism? Seems like it could be good and bad for Siyi and Wuyi.
You hit the nail on the head. Tourism's a tricky thing. It brings in money, creates jobs, supports businesses, and helps preserve culture. And it introduces these regions to the world.
But I bet there are downsides too.
Of course. It's about managing it right. Too much tourism can hurt the environment, turn culture into just a product, and push locals out.
So finding that sweet spot is key. How are they making sure tourism is actually good for Siyi and Wuyi?
Well, they're focusing on ecotourism, which is all about responsible travel. They work with locals to make sure it benefits everyone and doesn't harm nature.
It's not just about bringing people in, it's about teaching them to respect the place.
Absolutely. And ecotourism often means activities like hiking, bird watching, exploring nature. Good for tourists, A&D for appreciation of the environment.
Everyone wins. What else are they doing?
There's also community-based tourism, getting locals involved in planning and running things. This way, they benefit directly and make sure tourism aligns with their values.
So it's tourism that works with the community, not just in it.
Exactly. Sustainable tourism should be a win-win, benefiting visitors and locals, protecting the environment, and preserving culture.
This has been awesome. We've learned so much about Siyi and Wuyi, their culture, history, challenges, and opportunities. As we wrap up this segment, any final thoughts?
What strikes me is how vibrant these regions are. They have problems, sure, but they're also creative, energetic, and full of pride. They have a lot to offer, and I'm excited to see what their future holds.
I'm with you. Siyi and Wuyi are hidden gems, waiting to be discovered. They're places where tradition meets modernity, nature and culture blend perfectly, and the past and present come together to create something truly special. Okay, we've covered a ton about Siyi and Wuyi, their history, culture, the good and the bad. But there's something missing, right?
The human element. The real-life stories, the personal journeys, that's what brings these places to life.
That's what I love to hear. Our sources mentioned some great anecdotes about people from Siyi and Wuyi, both those who stayed and those who left.
One that really stuck with me was about Mr. Zhang. His grandfather left Taishan for the U.S. back in the early 1900s, built a good life there, but never forgot where he came from.
That seems to be a common theme, right? That strong tie to home, even after generations. It's like an invisible string pulling them back.
It's a deep part of their culture. Mr. Zhang's grandfather would send money back to Taishan to support his family and help his village. And he made sure his kids and grandkids were proud of their Taishanese heritage, sharing stories, traditions, even the dialect, kept that culture alive across the ocean.
It's amazing how those connections last, even over such long distances. Shows how powerful heritage is, that emotional bond to where you come from.
It really does. And Mr. Zhang's story shows how immigration affected both sides. The people who left built new lives, but their money and their connection to home had a big impact on Siyi and Wuyi too, both economically and culturally.
Yeah, history isn't just dates and events, it's about people's lives, their choices, their struggles, and their successes. Okay, what other stories stood out?
There's one about Mrs. Lai, grew up in Kaiping, surrounded by those dialects towers. Her family had been there for generations, so she really understood the history and traditions.
Wow, imagine growing up in a place like that, those towers all around you.
Yeah.
Must have been magical.
She describes it as exactly that, magical. A place where stories were everywhere. The past felt so real. But her story also shows the struggles young people face today. As she got older, a lot of her friends started leaving Kaiping, going to bigger cities for more opportunities.
That's happening everywhere, right? Young people leaving small towns for the city.
It's a tough situation, no easy answers. But Miss Lee's story is about choice, about that strong connection to a place. She decided to stay in Kaiping to help her community and make sure their heritage wasn't forgotten. She got involved in preserving the dialects towers, sharing their stories with the world.
That's so cool. Shows that young people aren't just running away. They're finding new ways to honor their roots, to connect tradition with modern life.
Exactly. Miss Lee shows us that preserving culture isn't just about old buildings. It's about keeping traditions alive, making them relevant today, and inspiring the next generation.
Finding that balance between the past and the future. Okay, one last story before we wrap up. What else resonated with you?
There's a short but powerful one about Mr. Chen from Jiangmen. Went to Europe to study, experienced all these new cultures and ways of life, but throughout it all, he kept feeling drawn back to Jiangmen.
That homesickness, it's a strong force. That need for the familiar, for where you belong.
It is. A lot of overseas Chinese feel it. Mr. Chen realized that his time abroad, even though it was amazing, made him appreciate his own culture even more, the traditions and values he grew up with. He went back to Jiangmen wanting to use his new skills to help his hometown to connect the global with the local.
These stories are powerful. They show how deeply people feel connected to Siyi and Wuyi, whether they've stayed or left.
They do. It's about the power of place, how it shapes us, where we come from, and where we belong.
We've explored a lot in this deep dive: history, culture, struggles, and hopes. What are the big takeaways for our listeners?
First, remember that Siyi and Wuyi are not just one thing. Each county has its own unique mix of cultures and history. It's like a mosaic, all these pieces making a beautiful whole.
It's like a band, right? Each instrument has its own sound, but together they create amazing music.
Exactly. Second, the resilience of the people in these regions. They've dealt with so much emigration, rapid changes, and they always find a way to adapt, keep their heritage alive.
That strength is amazing, that drive to honor the past while moving forward.
It is. And lastly, we have to understand how important it is to preserve what Siyi and Wuyi have, both culturally and naturally. They have so much to offer, from their architecture to their traditions and landscapes. It's on us to make sure these treasures are protected for the future.
It reminds us that culture isn't something fixed. It's alive, needs care, respect, and a willingness to change with the times. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, any final thought-provoking questions for our listeners?
Siyi and Wuyi are like a mini version of what's happening in China and the world today. Globalization, modernization, that push and pull between keeping traditions and moving forward. Their stories, their wins and losses can teach us a lot. So I'd ask our listeners, what can we learn from Siyi and Wuyi? How can their experiences help us deal with the challenges of the 21st century?
That's a great question. Makes us look beyond what we know, see the different ways people live, and find inspiration in their stories. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey. We hope you've discovered something new and amazing about the regions of Siyi and Wuyi.